Okay, in all honesty, not a whole lot has happened since the last time. A lot of the pieces were kind of cut close to kind of the basic size anyway. Really all I've done in the meantime is just do a little bit of fine tuning and kind of start to fit things together. The biggest part of which is trimming down the magwell a little bit. Now, until I could actually start fitting pieces together, these especially, I didn't know what was going to be actually wider than the other. So because if the magwell part was going to be wider, then I needed to favor that over this piece. But since this piece is just a hair wider, and when I talk about width, I mean overall width or depth or whatever. And so it wasn't until I actually started fitting things together that I could really tell, okay, the magwell thing is going to be just slightly, either level with or slightly lower than. But this is a very, I guess what you'd call a very powerful edge. If I'd favored the Magstrike magwell thing, then I would have had to remove part of the long shot front gun, and that's, like I said, a powerful line that would have really detracted from everything else. This is a main body point. I mean, that'd be like trying to cut away a bunch of the Raven to make room for something else. And so the Magstrike part becomes almost secondary, at least up in this area, because it's carries so much characteristic, or so much more personality down at the bottom here. We don't really need to worry about it up in the top. Essentially, because it kind of carries its own, since it's kind of like, hey, that's a big extended magwell, that's cool looking. We can play second fiddle to the main piece up here, which kind of is part of a bigger, more important main body component, I guess. The front of the Magstrike here, I'd known from the get-go was going to be too short, I guess width front to back. But it isn't checking, and what I ended up doing was taking the top of a Retaliator, because I was doing some measuring, because I needed something that would have a nice, that would be a good cap, so to speak, that would be symmetrical, that would screw together. And it turns out that the angle and everything on the Retaliator is the same as the long shot front gun, as far as the width here, and the angle and the width overall is pretty much the same. I mean, there's slight variations. At least this slightly wider part of the Retaliator, where it does meet up with the long shot front gun. But with that, it means that the main part of the Retaliator is slightly narrower than the Magstrike portion, and so there is this kind of a step down, which I'm okay with under the circumstances, since there was going to be a body line here anyway, which I think kind of breaks it up a little bit and makes it look nice, because I think if it was smooth, it would make it look really big. You'd just have a really big wall of material, and it would be kind of distracting, especially since everything else is broken up so much. So I may tweak this a little bit, and I'm even considering, because right now this portion of the Magstrike is resting directly on the Strife magwell. What I could do, if I wanted to narrow it up overall, which isn't a horrible idea, because I can remove this inner material in here and focus on just the kind of outside thickness here to actually act as the magwell. I could narrow this portion, because I've already narrowed it substantially over what the Magstrike originally had. But what I could do is remove this shape here, this kind of reverse, like half heart shape. Remove that from the Strife magwell, even if it was just like even if we just removed like part of the material, we don't necessarily even need to cut it all the way through. We could narrow it up a little bit more if we wanted it to match up with the Retaliator part here, which that wouldn't be a bad deal. I'm gonna wait until I have a better plan for especially this area right here, before I start committing to do any unnecessary weird cuts. So right now these are very, very rough cuts as far as what the eventual shape. I mean, the basic shape is here, But there's going to be a lot more fitting. Like I might even shorten this up a little bit more, whether moving the whole works up or just cutting the bottom off, or I may trim a little bit off of the retaliator part and tuck it in just a little bit to make it narrower. But because right now this is rather wide, and it depends on how the rest of the body takes shape overall. Because right now when it's a billion different colors, like when I look at it I say, oh, there's a raven and some things, but once it's glued together and we have some of these pieces blended together, and especially back here, the stock, this is literally just slapped on the back. That's just to define the profile. I'm gonna go do some cutting and some filling and stuff like that. But once we can put a solid color on it, then you'll be able to tell more of the details, like I said, is the magwell too tall. Part of the advantage of the mag strike part is that you have this cool little hooked in part. And so I'm thinking, just in the back of my head, when it comes time for paint, I could paint this kind of a neutral, black or a metallic color, and that'd really accentuate this kind of like swoosh little area here, and kind of the more aggressive slant on the magwell, and that makes it look a little bit narrower than if you look at it of the whole width like this. So that's kind of a fun little part of having this thing here. I haven't decided on what to do for kind of a grip area, because I don't want to run a trigger for the tank, which I actually am currently looking at using an XBZ that I'm just going to minimize a little bit, cut an inch or so out of it to make it fit, because it'll be a heck of a lot easier to rig up a trigger on the blast button of the XBC as opposed to trying to rig up a trigger setup on the pull pin from that Supermax tank. So that's kind of what we're looking at there for right now. Everything else should be the same as far as the 3-dart absolver assembly on the front. Another thing I'm thinking about, because having, we got this kind of cool kind of stair-step angle here on the top, but then the bottom is very square. It's just very square. It gives it almost kind of an underbite, or like a big chin kind of look. Something I want to do to kind of alleviate part of that is to basically make a cut, probably with my razor saw, a real fine cut, and just cut basically the very front off, and then make a little pie cut. So instead of being flat here, then just angle it back just a tiny bit, and I don't think we'd have to go very far, but basically make the cut like that, and then reattach it essentially, so you'd have kind of a beveled look, kind of like that. Yeah, kind of like that. And that's one of those things that you make your cut, and then you kind of make a very slight cut back, test it. Does that look cool? No, let's go a little bit more, and then kind of inch your way back. But I'm thinking that'll help make the front end look a little lighter, especially where the rest of the blaster doesn't have a lot of square angles anywhere. Everything is very, very angular and has a lot of very strong lines like that. So that's an option. Another consideration, but it'll mean making the tank even smaller than I'm already planning on making it, is to move this back a little bit further. Now this was already cut away because I was going to move it back, but then when I started looking at the bigger tank, I decided to push it forward a little bit to the stock orientation. But I'm still kicking around the idea of moving that slightly back, but that's going to change the relationship of the front of the magwell here, so that's another one of those situations where I could end up making a cut in the width of the retaliator and narrowing that up a little bit. But that's kind of the basic idea. That's things basically assembled. I actually had these top pieces glued on earlier, but I took them off to do some more fine tuning. But the rest of the blaster is actually glued together, and is actually incredibly comfortable. Adding the little bit of extra material, what is that, just like an inch and a half on the back of the Raven, and having a nice square, more prominent surface there, it's just incredibly comfortable in that. And the being able to just grab the magwell, and then of course it'll end up having the trigger up here it'll have a little trigger guard on it. But as far as just holding it, I'm really excited to get this thing in one piece and be able to start working on it. as far as start working on internals and testing it, because I'm really excited to be able to actually shoulder this thing and fire it and stuff like that. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at right now, just doing the cuts and doing just fitting. There's going to be a whole lot more fitting. If anything more exciting shows up, then of course I'll address that.